Welcome to Dev Interrupted. I'm your host, Andrew Ziegler.
And I'm your host, Ben Lloyd Pearson.
This week, we're bringing Alex Salazar, CEO of Arcade.dev, on the show to discuss why a working AI demo is only 1% of the journey. Because the gap between a flashy proof of concept and a secure production ready system is huge. And giving AI less freedom is the surprising key to making it reliable and safe for your users. But first, Ben, welcome back.
Yeah, I'm officially back. I've been out for a few weeks. My wife and I, we welcomed our second son into the world, Arthur Gene Pearson. Had a really great summer break, took some time off, spent it with my family. I feel like I came back with some lessons learned, had a bit of an AI cleanse. It was really nice, actually.
Oh, an AI cleanse. That doesn't sound like the bet I know.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, I practically have not touched AI at all, pretty much since I left. There was one exception, and it failed spectacularly, which is kind of hilarious. So, one of the many projects I took on while I was out was I helped my 4-year-old organize all of his Lego, and I had a couple of, like times where I just like asked ChatGPT, hey, what is this Lego that I don't recognize? And it just like it completely misidentified it and like was like not helpful whatsoever. And then another time, I think I sent it a picture of like a car I was building and was like, "Hey, help me design like a front end for this car." And it gave me some like elaborate ASCII diagrams that like made no sense whatsoever. And I'm like completely unconvinced that it was like a functional design at all. But I guess I have two lessons that I've learned from my time off. Not every problem needs to be solved with AI, and sometimes spending a little time disconnected from it all, like AI and just technology in general, is just a really good thing. So, I encourage everyone out there to like just whether it's AI or it's just technology in general, like get disconnected a little bit, spend some time with your family or people you care about. It's been a really great summer for me. How was your summer, Andrew? You had a lot of guests on the show while it was out. It was really great to listen to all of them.
Oh, yeah, just while you've been out, we just had a few folks, come and keep your seat warm and keep me company because I was by myself here. And so you huge thank you to all of the guests who did come on the show to help fill in new segments. I'm really looking forward to bringing more back in the future, maybe giving Ben more breaks to, go play with more Legos. But I feel having heard your story, I kind of feel actually the opposite now. I feel like we're going to be like the angel and the devil sitting on like our listeners' shoulders, like advocating these two sides of the world that we're all in right now. Because I mean, gosh, just last week, I was on site all day at Code TV in Portland filming a vibe coding competition that I was competing in. So I just couldn't feel more different in terms of my AI usage. And your story too is funny to me because I wonder now in my head, like, is the AI seeing Lego pieces or is it seeing a car? It's kind of an interesting question.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. With that said, if we got anyone from Lego who's listening to this, I would love to help you all figure out how to train these models on Lego to help parents like me everywhere. Because wow, I've got a whole bunch of organized Lego now and no AI to help me make sense of it all. So for now, I have to rely on antiquated instruction manuals, I guess.
Classic.
Yeah. So with that said, let's just get right back into it. I'm excited to get into the news. So what do we have on the docket for today, Andrew?
Oh gosh, well, we have some really interesting developments. One of the first ones that was big news for folks is Google avoiding a breakup with Chrome. So we've covered this before about
Yep.
how there was a ruling for where Google had to sell Chrome and divest from its control of the browser in a monopoly ruling in U.S. courts, right? And this has been a really interesting change in the development here, where they no longer have to give up that browser. So back when that happened, we all talked about how this was a shift in like the powers that be around browsers, which have a pretty defined market share at this point in terms of adoption. Chrome kind of eating all the rest of the pack. It put the future of browsers in question at a time when AI was already
Yep.
transforming all the tools we're using every day, including the one used by our guests last week. Zach Lloyd of Warp tackling the terminal, right? Classic tools that are getting flipped on their head with AI, and the browser is no different to that. So, what did you think of this story, Ben?
Yeah, I mean this ruling, or I guess almost like a reversal of a previous ruling, it feels like a rug pull for the ages. Like at this point, I almost don't even know what to think or what to say about it because I feel like this isn't even going to be the end of it at this point. And it's been pretty crazy watching this drama unfold over the past few months because, there really weren't a lot of buyers out there that made a whole lot of sense for Chrome. Like it really didn't seem like there were going to be like anyone that materialized that would pay what it's worth and would make sense to have that be the company versus, Google being the one that owns it. Like I think Perplexity came out of the woodwork at one point and offered some crazy amount of money for it. It's just been
Yeah.
kind of nuts. But so, I mean, my take is that, instead of like just completely cleaving off Chrome, now there's like more of a nuanced restriction on what Google can do with Chrome moving forward. So there's like restrictions on their ability to enter into like exclusivity agreements with like mobile phone producers. They're also going to be required to share data about search rankings and basic user data with some of their competitors. But honestly, I don't think we're anywhere near the end of this. I think this is going to get drug out for quite a while, and maybe even to a point where it starts to get disrupted by some of the more like AI native upstarts that we're seeing emerge in this space. Like I've thought for a while that browsers are probably going to get disrupted by AI because it's something that is it's an older technology that is ripe for disruption. And I think maybe before this really even takes effect, Chrome and Google may have an argument that they don't really have a monopoly because they're getting disrupted by these new technologies. And speaking of which, we have another news story that is right up this alley involving Atlassian buying an AI powered browser. So what's going on here, Andrew?
Yeah, this is the latest, immediately almost after this ruling, just like days later, or that really just like 2 days later, I think. We hear the great announcement from Atlassian of tackling this exact problem that you and I are talking about the browser being ripe for disruption because it doesn't match the world that we live in the way that we consume information. And it's even when you think about like how AI has eaten search, it makes sense that AI would then also start to eat the browser. What do you do in a browser? You're searching, you're looking for things. And so the latest announcement from Atlassian is they purchased the browser company in their bid to build the AI powered browser of the future. And this is a browser that it will be power built for, you know, uh, people who are on a computer, and or rather is going to be power built for people that are developer minded and using new technologies. And so it's going to be embedded really closely with all of the things that we're already familiar with from the Atlassian ecosystem in terms of its breadth and its depth and its security, right? And so this is a really interesting new development. I'm kind of curious to see how it's going to connect with everything else in the Atlassian world as well.
Yeah, it seems like Atlassian is trying to pursue that like AI native web browser experience, and the argument that they are making in some of their promotional materials is that like browsers were kind of designed to be a consumption device. Like you consume a recipe off a cooking website, or you consume an article that you're reading, or you consume your email. And a lot of the productivity tools that we use were kind of tacked on to it as like almost like an afterthought. It's not quite the right way to describe it, but it is kind of how they've been approached. And I'm like I absolutely love niche web browsers, so I like wholly support like anyone and everyone entering this space and trying to compete with it because I think there's plenty of room for competition. It is hard to compete when you have an established player like Chrome and Apple with Safari, but
Yeah.
I love to see more companies in this space. But I have always kind of thought that browsers are like fundamentally not very well designed for professional work because they kind of treat all of our tools as separate entities rather than like a connected workflow that has to sort of work together. And just as an aside, I kind of think this is also a big part of why AI is often overhyped and is not as successful as people want it to be because we have such a strong tool disconnect. Whether it's just knowledge work in general, but also with software development. Like this is also a very common thing that happens. There's this tool disconnect that makes it creates like sort of like this context chasm that's actually really tough for AI to bridge. Like humans have sort of adapted to get pretty good at bridging that, but AI really kind of struggles with that, and I think that's a part of it. So And I think Atlassian is the perfect type of company to like take on this type of challenge, and it makes sense for them to acquire a company like the browser company of New York, as an opportunity to innovate. Versus like what we've seen some other companies in the AI space do, where they use acquisition as a strategy to lock out competition rather than
Right.
as a strategy to actually like create new innovation. But this is going to be an incredible challenge for them. You know, they're trying to rethink browsers for AI driven knowledge work. They're going to have to rethink user behaviors, like not just innovating new products. Like they're actually going to have to rethink how people interact with the web, which I think is really hard to change behaviors. Companies like Apple work really hard to make that happen, and not a lot of companies are successful at pulling that off. So, I'm going to be watching it very closely. Like I'm excited for it. I don't know, what's going to come out of it, but maybe we'll try it out for Dev Interrupted at some point. Like,
Oh,
I
for
think it's a pretty
sure.
cool development.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to be trying it out. I mean, when I attended a Atlassian team earlier this year, and I saw on full display like the cohesion of the Atlassian ecosystem, it gave me a lot of confidence in how they can tackle problems. And they bring everything to be a system of work about like an orchestrated excellence between knowledge workers that are doing their best work every day and communicating with each other. And with AI hitting the scene in tech, I think communicating with each other better and better is only more and more important. And so these tools that are better combining these different ways that we communicate with each other is just going to be a huge win. So I'm excited to see how they tackle it.
Yeah. So let's move on to the next story, which is, yet another executive from a tech company talking about how awesome their company is with AI. So what's going on here, Andrew?
Yeah, so this is a tweet from Brian Armstrong, the CEO of Coinbase, who is no stranger to provocative comments on Twitter about how the practices at Coinbase or how he views his role as an entrepreneur, right?
Yeah,
And so
absolutely.
this is the latest in that installment. So this is him posting that about 40% of daily code written at Coinbase is AI generated, and he wants to get it above 50% by October. And he got a lot of negative lashback and attention from folks about this comment. And Ben, you may want to guide us through some of the things that you saw.
Yeah, yeah, definitely a lot of negative attention over this one. And I think the problem here is that everyone needs to just stop associating the phrase AI generated with vibe coding. Like those are two very, very different statements when people say
Yep.
those things. So when you say 40, something like 40% of our code is AI generated, it is probably not nearly as glamorous as you might think it is. Andrew, like probably 40% of the stuff that, well, at least before I went on break and went on an AI cleanse and haven't fully got back into AI, but probably 40% of what I wrote or the words that I created in my computer were AI generated at some point. But it's not like every single like it's not like I'm writing like some opus using AI. It's a lot of like emails and Slack messages and like just routine toilsome work. So yeah, a lot of what I've seen in these situations is AI doing this like routine grunt work rather than these like high profile features and capabilities. So don't view this as like we've replaced all of our engineers and now AI is generating code. That's like the first point that I want to make. The second point is that while I think this is like an interesting metric to track as like a baseline of like are developers actually using AI to create stuff, I don't think it's a very good one to set goals around. And I
Mm.
really hope that he doesn't have this set as like some sort of long term goal beyond October, because as somebody who used to work as a developer and got measured on effort based productivity, quote unquote productivity goals. I can think of at least a dozen ways to use AI to generate meaningless lines of code and get that number well above 50% long before October. You know what? This week I could get that number up to 70, 80%. If that was the goal, we could be doing 100%. You know what? We could make all of our code AI generated.
Yeah.
Uh,
Here's the problem with that is that it's arbitrary. Like ultimately,
yeah.
when you're measuring a percentage of all of your code and you're trying to see what percentage of it is AI generated versus not, you have to also remember that, AIs are very verbose. They're loquacious. They love to add way more code than you probably ultimately need. So this can become a symptom of other problems within your organization and not representative of even like the total amount of code in your code base. Because if you want to get it above 50%, well, if you're creating on average 30 to 40% more code baseline now and managing that much more, it's like that bloat is completely useless in a lot of ways. It's going to be hard to manage. And we know when you try to interconnect them all, it gets really difficult. And the thing is here is that like once you make this a metric that you want to track and grow, like it becomes so easy to like gamify this to an extreme. Oh, my CEO wants as much AI generated code as possible. I'm going to just be, have this crazy huge output. And maybe that's what Brian wants, right? Maybe that's what he wants, is more output from his engineers. But I think of the downstream implications of rotating on this metric as something as like a North Star to track within your engineering org, because I think it's going to leave nasty surprises for you in the future. I think that AI is best when it's used like an anvil to sharpen like a blade, like you should really continue to make that blade as good and as sharp as possible. And you shouldn't get distracted from what your goal is, which is like to make a really good blade, right? And so if you're ultimately just trying to make something really big, it's like, what are you doing here?
Yeah. Yeah, I get the impression that Armstrong is not the type of person that just wants volume. And part of that is because he has made comments multiple times in the past about how you can't just have more code, particularly through vibe coding. You do also, and particularly around things that do things like move money, like Coinbase moves a lot of money, and you can't, like, that's a really important thing to do right, so if you can't just have AI slop going into those systems.
Completely.
But he has made a lot of comments around AI about how like they do encourage people to have really strong, robust code reviews, make sure that everything has appropriate checks in place, and that there's always an appropriate human in the loop mechanism to review things. So I kind of think it's a mixture of Coinbase being pretty forward thinking in terms of like AI adoption, mixed
Mm-hmm.
with Armstrong not quite articulating his opinion, quite as well as maybe he could. Coupled with the media just wanting to take comments like this and create controversy
It's a
around
perfect
them.
storm. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. I agree.
yeah. But he did also make some other statements recently when he sat down in an interview with Stripe president John Collison, where he
Mm.
admitted that the Coinbase had a directive recently where they gave all of their engineers a week to onboard with some AI tools that they had decided all their engineers had to start using. I think they had mentioned Cursor and maybe one other tool that they decided all their engineering had to start using. Gave them a week deadline to say you need to onboard with this, and if you're not onboarded by the end of the week, or you don't have a good excuse, then you're fired. And they had a Saturday meeting where anyone who hadn't been onboarded uh, and didn't have an excuse at that meeting got fired on the spot. And
Oh
you
my
know,
gosh.
getting fired on a Saturday meeting aside, which I have lots of opinions on that I'll leave for maybe another time. uh, and maybe this is a harsh way to go about it, but I do actually, my hot take on this is I do actually kind of agree with his sentiment on this, even if I don't necessarily agree with the approach to it. Like, we are reaching a stage where things like AI tooling is becoming a critical component of software develop of just knowledge work in general, but also particularly within software development. And if
Yeah.
you finding yourself on a team, or if you yourself or someone out there who's just refusing to be a part of this, you need to either be very conscious of why you're making that decision, because there are valid reasons to not use AI in this day and age. You need to be very conscious of those reasons, or you need to understand that you're making a decision that if you were an engineer that said, I'm not going to use an IDE, or I'm not going to use a text editor as a part of my job, or I'm not going to use CI/CD, people would question your competency as an engineer. And we're reaching that point with AI as well. And I may not agree with the approach that these execs take, but I do somewhat agree with the sentiment, at least. But with that said, I kind of wish we would get beyond this whole like execs making vague statements about AI just to imply that they're like ahead of the curve. What I really want to see is to see the reality of this. Like, show us what you're actually doing with the
Oh yeah.
AI. Stop telling us that you're just like writing all of this code with AI with these vague statements, and like send your engineers out to events. Like, have them share their knowledge. Like, show us the cool stuff that they're doing. If they're actually generating this much code and it's valuable to us, like share that knowledge with the rest of the engineering community, because we're all trying to learn right now. And speaking of which, Andrew, you and I are going to be at an event this week, the Engineering Leadership Conference in San Francisco, where I imagine, among other things, we will be talking to all kinds of engineering leaders about how they're using AI within their organization. So if you're in San Francisco, if you're at this event, make sure you stop by. We'll have the Dev Interrupted booth there. We'll be recording some episodes. We'll be handing out some really cool swag. So we love doing this stuff. But yeah, if you're doing cool stuff in AI, it's time to start sharing what you're doing. Stop keeping it secret. Stop trying to just catch headlines and show us what you're doing.
Yeah, I'm so excited to see you later this week and get some FaceTime in person with members of the Dev Interrupted community. We're going to be there and recording episodes even. So stay tuned for some really great recorded episodes there on site. We're really excited to bring these lineup of guests for y'all.
All right, cool. We got one more cool little story about everyone's favorite tool, Jira. What do we have here, Andrew?
Oh, we're back at Atlassian, my favorite. So this is an article from Sean Godecki. We love his engineering blog here at Dev Interrupted. This is not the first time we've dropped one of these from Hacker News, making the front page here on Dev Interrupted. This is an article about crushing Jira tickets and what does it really mean for an engineer if they just hit it week after week after week, taking all those tickets from the beginning to the end of that Kanban board, right? And I loved this article because it dives into why we're all making software in the first place. It's about shipping impact and not closing tickets. It's about sharing, or rather, it's about working together to find the real problems for your organization and solve them, but do so in a visible way where you have buy-in from your leaders and your impact of what you're doing is aligning with where the company is going. And this is really rooted in a really great anecdote that Sean shares in this article that I really resonated with. I love that he shared this really, very raw moment from his career where he taken a personal responsibility to maintain a high level of passing levels of these tests within his engineering work, right? Pushing it from 90% to 100, made it completely green. That was his personal passion, his mission within that org. And ultimately, once he had achieved that, it was thrown aside effectively by leadership and by his manager, and it was seen as a waste of his time. And this was, really upsetting for Sean. Anyone who's had a passion project at work really resonates with that. I've been that person before where maybe you over rotate on something that's really personally interesting to you or really aligned with other stuff that you want to be working on, but maybe not driving the highest impact within your organization. And so ultimately this article gets at why, when you go into Jira and you're just like clearing out a week of sprint tickets that are falling on your plate, are you really solving for impact here? Or are there opportunities where you can actually look at what's important to your leaders, important to your manager, important to your VP from your skip levels, and really then think outside the box to tackle the bigger problems that maybe there aren't tickets for yet?
Well, first of all, Sean, if you're out there listening, I'm going to give you a hard truth. Tell me that you have bad Jira hygiene without actually saying that you have bad Jira hygiene. No, I'm joking. But I mean, if Jira is an accurate representation of prioritizable work, closing tickets should actually represent some level of impact,
Yeah.
in an ideal world, right? But that's not the reality. We all live in the real world. Jira's a mess often. Nobody has the time to like infinitely groom their Jira backlog to ensure that it's all properly organized and prioritized. Maybe we'll have AI bots that do that for us in the future, which we'll have a little bit on that in maybe just a moment. But I think this story is really more relevant than ever right now, because as AI accelerates our ability to do work, now we can accomplish more than ever. But that doesn't necessarily mean we're having a bigger impact than ever. If you're doing the wrong work, it just means you're doing more of the wrong thing than you've ever done before. And I think now in this particular moment in particular, the human being in the equation is still an incredibly critical element in determining what's important or what's the right thing to do in any one moment. And I say that with one big caveat. I did see this really neat MCP prototype that you built, Andrew, while I was out on my leave and that you were playing around with, that where you were like asking Claude's like, what should I prioritize today for my work? And it was like going into some like Jira queues and Git data and like coming up with like what it thought was like the most important stuff in the team's queue and giving you some recommendations. And I thought that was actually really awesome. And I was like, okay, well, actually, maybe AI can start to like tell us what's important now too.
Yeah, I think MCP is pretty rad. I agree with your perspectives on Sean, and this article, or rather about like prioritizable work and what's in your Jira really does it represent what's like is ultimately what is on your Jira board should align with what is going to drive the most impact. But sadly we don't all live in that perfect org, and oftentimes those tickets that pile up don't match to it, right? But you know thinking about the things like the MCP demo that I made, there was no ticket for that. There was, a
Yeah.
need within the organization that I identified, and then it kind of leapt at making something that was usable. And it wasn't perfect and it wasn't great. I didn't have all the answers, but no one working with MCP right now does, by the way. I wrote about that on Dev Interrupted last week on our Thursday send. And MCP, as y'all know, we've talked about many times on the show. It's a really interesting thing to be messing around with. But if I talk about it anymore, I promise you, Ben, that Adam, our editor, his head's probably already in his hands because of how long we've taken in this news segment. He's gonna have so much of it on the floor. And so, folks, if you want to learn more about MCP, I would actually recommend that you join our webinar that's coming up on September 17th. I'm hosting that and giving a live MCP demo, and there's going to be info about that just after the jump in our mid-roll. But moving on, I just want to make sure that we can close up our news segment. But before I do, Ben, do you have any last words from what we talked about today?
No, it's great to be back. Glad to help our audience navigate the AI-driven era once again. We'll bring back more guest news hosts, I'm sure of it. And yeah, let's keep moving forward. Great to
Well,
be here.
great. So next up on Dev Interrupted, we have Forbes Cloud 100 Rising Stars. It just announced its newest list, and our next guest company, RK.dev, is among them. So stay tuned because after the break, we're sitting down with Alex Salazar. Today, we're talking about how everyone is chasing gold with AI and how some people are digging and some people are selling the pickaxes. But Alex Salazar and Arcade, they're building the vault because, as it turns out, AI that talks is easy, but AI that does something, that's not too hard either. Where everything breaks down is when AI tries to do something securely. We've all seen this again and again, especially if you care about privacy, compliance, and customer trust, which we all do. And Arcade isn't just handing out keys, they're helping developers build their own vaults so AI can act on behalf of users securely without blowing a hole in your whole security model. And if you're leading an engineering team and thinking about AI in production, security is not an edge case. It's a foundational question that we're going to learn more about today. So, Alex, thanks for joining us on Dev Interrupted.
No, thanks for having me.
So, let's start by talking about the problem that I've defined here. We've talked a bit about AI and how it uses tools on Dev Interrupted. But in this case, you've been talking recently on LinkedIn about how a lot of AI projects, they look really great in demos and they're really flashy and they do this unique thing. But then you actually try to implement it with your team or take it on a larger implementation, and that's when something really hits the wall. What happens there, Alex?
Yeah. Look, I think one of the most disorienting parts of building agents versus normal software or pre-agent software is that, it used to be that if you got a demo working, you were, let's say, halfway there. And then you just had to add some reliability and add some security, and it was all relatively straight shot. It was just labor. There wasn't a ton of risk. And that's not true at all in agents. And so we started actually as an agents company. We were trying to build a site reliability agent, that could diagnose a problem, in your environment. You get an alert from Datadog, and we'd help you figure out what was going on. And that was the original concept of the product. And we, like everybody else in agents, ran into this phenomenon where the demo is actually the easiest piece. Like the demo is like 1% of the work.
Right.
Once you get the demo working, like 90% of the work is getting it to be production grade. And because large language models are so malleable and they're so smart, generalizable, that they can fool you, right? They can get a demo working relatively easy. But going from that easy demo to something production grade, it might be an entirely different product. Like you might have to change everything. And it's not obvious from the demo how close or far you are from production, but you're typically really far from production. And so the things that get in the way, the first one is consistency and accuracy. When you have a demo, you're not running evals. You're not looking to see like what percentage of the time the large language model is properly selecting the right next step in the workflow or the right tool call and the right parameters. You're eyeballing it. And if it happens enough times successfully, you're like, awesome demo. And with the caveat that it's a demo. And whoever you show it to is like, oh my God, I can't believe you did that. That's really cool. It only needs to do it once in order for everybody to be really happy.
Right.
But in production, it needs to happen a lot. If it's not to get everything right, like north of 80%, and actually more likely like north of 90% of the time, depending on the use case, the user experience is just going to suck, and people aren't going to trust it. People aren't going to use it. Just take security and safety out of it. Just users just think it sucks. And so that's the first really, really big one. That's one of the biggest killers to demo to production agents. The second one ends up being security and safety. And it's not even really just like tinfoil hat, CISO large enterprise thing. Why can't ChatGPT send an email? So if you want to, it's 2025, they still can't send an email. And it's a security thing, safety thing. And so, in a demo, you can give it like a Google app key, or you can hard code your credentials into some other service. Like there's all these hacks you can do in demo to make it work. But that's never what you would do in production. And it might work for one single user, but it would never work for a multi-user environment. And so a lot of agents are blocked. I mean, why isn't there a personal assistant agent today? We've been talking about personal assistant agents for years, and there still isn't one. A lot of it is because how is the agent going to go talk to your Gmail, your calendar, the airlines? How's it going to purchase something for you? Those problems are largely solved by what we built, but many of them aren't solved yet either. And the last one ends up being the last two are token costs. When you're doing a demo, you're not looking at the bill. You spent $50, no big deal. It was a demo, and $50 is nothing. But then when you extrapolate to 100,000 users, suddenly like that's every day that'd be the finance of the agent doesn't make any sense anymore. You'll lose money. You'll be negative margin. And then latency. I think people really underestimate the impact of latency. The more as you try and get the large language model more accurate and smarter and do things better, you start stuffing in more things in the context window. Well, that's going to drive the cost up, but it also drives up latency. And the more you do sequential thinking or any other kind of complex workflows, latency really starts to expand, and the smarter models are slower. And so all of a sudden, you have this really cool operation, and maybe it is really accurate, but it takes a minute, or it takes 30 seconds, or even 10 seconds, depending on what it is. Like depending on the use case, the user may or may not find that viable. And so just those are things we typically see chill projects.
Yeah. And these constraints you've kind of defined they're interesting because they make for a very unique space where if you have like those 3 or 4 strong constraints around like why we don't have AI assistants today, why they don't send emails, all of these things or like $50 for a demo versus, millions of dollars for all your daily active users. Like when you have all of those kinds of constraints, you kind of get tempted to sacrifice one. And so that's where you get this demo phenomenon. You sacrifice security for the sake of putting on the veneer for the other kinds of functionality, the show like, look what this cool demo does, or look what we're building. But then when you actually go to build it, it becomes something totally different. And that's also because obviously the space is moving so quickly. Like just it was like a few weeks ago on this podcast, we had Kabir Bedi from AWS, and they built an AI video generator tool. And he talked about that at length about how, what they started with and then what they built over the course of like the last like year, and then what they ultimately brought to the market for like mom and pop business owners, right? Like that, it probably had 3 different forms ultimately. So that's where you get this like rapid evolution. And it's like and a lot of times when we talk about this on Dev Interrupted, it seems like a team's expectation problem more than it is like, all of those constraints. They're certainly solvable if you have the right expectations and you work about it in the right way. So, what are some things that you see for teams that get it right, get it wrong, about how they move past like the demo gloss and actually start solving?
Yeah, so I'll tell you our story, which is ultimately how we pivoted into what is now the product, which is a tool execution and tool authorization system.
Yeah.
So we started out as a SRE agent, and we were getting compounding error rates, which meant like every, if you think of like a diagnostic flow, like why is service A slow? You're going to check the databases, you're going to check the servers, you're going to check to see if somebody committed code last night. There's all these checks, but like it's almost an infinite space of things they might check, and the diagnostic like workflows, the chains themselves can get really long. But every time you ask a large language model any question, you're rolling the dice. The power of a large language model is also its weakness, is that it's approximating things.
Right.
And so because it's approximation, it's non-deterministic, and so it can get things wrong. It can hallucinate, have errors. And so every time you roll the dice, every time you call it, you're rolling the dice. And if you roll a 1, it fails. Well, if you've got really complex flows where you're calling it multiple times, you're rolling the dice more. And if you roll a 1 once, the whole chain fails.
Right.
And so we're running into these problems. That was problem 1. They're called compounding error rates. And then the second thing we were running into was, okay, well, we've given this agent super user access to Datadog and the servers and the databases, and it works.
Right.
It's great for a demo, but now like as we're going to go try and like make this thing actually sellable, it's got to not do that. We have to like really scope down resources and leverage existing permissioning systems, and there was no way to do that. And so we ultimately had to invent all of this stuff for ourselves to make it work. And when we got it working and we started to show people a working demo, people were blown away. People who knew AI were blown away. They couldn't believe that we had really consistent data plots, or that we were authenticating as on behalf of me into a service and properly scope permissions from within inside the agent loop. And then we realized, this is a bigger product than the agent. So we ultimately pivoted and started showing and selling people that, which is what our key is now.
Yeah.
So my answer of like, if I were building an agent today, what would I do to get around all these things and to really increase the odds of me succeeding? Obviously the issue is arcade, but let's put that to the side. One, this is general software engineering best practices. Like you should be using stuff off the shelf to the degree that you can, because there's so much to figure out and build and learn that if you try and custom build everything from scratch, you're going to run into a really big problem.
Yeah.
And so the easiest thing to start with is go grab an agentic, go grab an agent framework, and avoid trying to build your own. And yes, the learning curves are really steep, but they're really steep for a reason, because when you custom build it yourself, you can fool yourself into thinking that you've got it because of the demo phenomenon. I looked at that demo and I didn't need all of these frameworks. But all these frameworks are really complicated because they're building for production and they're not necessarily building for demo. And so by volley, we largely see LangGraph. And then behind it, we see OpenAI's Agent SDK.
Yes.
And there's a bunch of other ones. There's Pydantic, there's Mastra, there's Screw AI. But like pick one that you think fits your requirements in production, and go and run. As you're picking those, I strongly recommend like really thinking through like what production is going to look like, not the demo. Like optimize for the final state, not the demo, because of this phenomenon, which I see a lot of people get stuck on.
Yeah.
They'll optimize. Oh well, look, I deployed this one because it's so easy, and but they're optimizing for the demo,
Right.
and so they'll optimize for prod. I think the other thing I would say is um, you've got to start with evals. Like you've got to build a muscle of evaluations right out of the gate, because there's really no way you're going to get a production grade agent that's consistent enough if you're not really good with evaluations. And there's a lot of products out there that can help you. Plangsmith, there's Brain Trust.
Yeah.
We have a framework very specific for tool use and tool calling. So the tools are out there. You just need to set them up and use them. And for people who are not native to AI ML, like traditional web developers, this is very alien. But it's really critical because we're all used to deterministic tests, pi
Right.
test, integration tests, unit tests. And like, how do you do a test on a function where there's an infinite number of correct answers, an infinite number of incorrect answers, and an infinite number of in the middle gray?
Right.
And you can't build those. There is no CI system that can support that. You need that. That's what evals are, and there's a different animal.
Yeah.
And then I don't know. The last thing I'll say on this topic, because I talk a lot about it to people, is de-scope the living daylights out of your project. Even teams that have picked the right stacks and have built evals and all this stuff, but like the other thing that like where they hang themselves is they try and do too many different things.
Yeah.
And this stuff is complicated enough and new enough where you just increase your odds significantly if you're trying to automate like one particular workflow first, get the win and go. And a bonus one is picking the project that you're going to go do. Like, let's call it project selection. Like, what is it you're going to work on? What's that workflow you're going to automate? Man, like that's half the battle. And I would urge people to focus on places where there are modern APIs already available. Or yeah, I'll pause there, because if they don't already have modern APIs to access, the complexity goes through the roof. Like you try to build an agent that's browser based,
Mm-hmm.
you can make it work. There are really good products out there like Browser Use and Browser Base and a few others, but
Introducing a lot more complexity.
lot more complexity. And so if you're going to build an agent and you have the privilege of picking where you start, I would try and focus where there are modern APIs.
Yeah. Okay. I think this is really, I love how you framed it about the eval situation being so alien from like writing normal tests. I think that's something that rings really true. That's something that I've had to adjust to as an engineer, moving from writing deterministic code to evaluating how my prompts or my workflows are doing. The idea of like setting up the side-by-side benchmark is, definitely new to a lot of folks, but it's a really critical part of building those tools. And it's just as important as the demo. I find whenever I work on those is starting from the eval, just like how you would start from tests or start from, that more deterministic way is like actually going to help frame what you're looking for a lot better. You know what success is earlier, and failure immediately. But I like too how you talk about your product moving because of opportunities, because of problems, and because of constraints in the space, moving from like an SRE kind of agent, which an SRE is already solving a very complex, highly secure, very specific, like architectural, infrastructural, problem for teams, right? So then when you shift into like we're just going to focus on solving the security, it's like sounds like you taking your own advice of like what you just said about descoping, because that security element that Arcade now was probably, or initially a very critical component of SRE agent, that was of the days of yore. And so you descoped yourself and you found what you're building now at Arcade. And it just just to bridge it into MCP a bit, and because our listeners we talked about this a bit. We've had some guests even talk recently about MCP. We had the CTO, co-founder of a like first of its kind MCP agency, who's like they're out there making MCP tools for companies that are using these with agents right now. So there's like a lot of interesting kind of conversations in this, and we always are kind of going around security a bit. So I'm kind of curious to know, you know we've talked a bit about the growing pains and about building with the tools, but what's your advice for folks that are experimenting with tool calls as part of their workflows that they're building with their teams, especially like in their engineering world that they live in?
Yeah. So right now, tool use, tool calling is all the rage, right? It is, at least in 2025, it is the biggest bottleneck and biggest opportunity in agents, which is crazy because, we were deep in it before it was cool.
Oh, so you're saying I was at this problem space.
We were the OGs.
We all showed up.
We were the OGs. But so it's been really awesome to see the whole community kind of come to the same realizations that we had come to when we made the pivot and started to build the core product. That part's awesome. So let me contextualize it on why it's so important. Like why is it just so exciting for everybody? If you go back to what we just talked about of compounding error rates and consistency and accuracy, and if the model asks too many questions, like you're going to hallucinate and have an error and all this eval stuff. The big insight we had in our agent, the reason we got it working was agents are non-deterministic, right? Large language models are non-deterministic. That is their power. That's also the risk. And so the big insight that we came to that led us to Arcade was we dialed up determinism. And so there's, prior, at least for us, prior to this big insight, we were all in on the large language model, figuring everything out. And that wasn't working because of error rates. And so when we just had this big epiphany one day and we just started to like dial determinism back up, like the analogy I give people is instead of letting the large language model just figure stuff out and go through its planning phases and then, in multiple series of planning phases, we were like, no. We're going to give it a discrete set of multiple choice questions. We're going to hand it the TI-85 calculator and we're going to give it all the buttons. And it can only pick from buttons during it. And when we constrain the large language model like to that degree, that's when things started working really well. And so the core insight that led us to Arcade, which is also the core insight that everyone's now having around tool use and MCP and all these different technologies, is that if you dial up determinism and give the large language model these buttons, and these buttons represent things that can connect to the outside world, you can build all the things that we all want to build, but couldn't before.
I see. That's really interesting. So if I understand what you're saying correctly, it's instead of being like you are a free agent that can consider these tools as part of your thought and knowledge working process. Instead, it's like, okay, sit down. Here's your multiple choice exam. Each of these questions, there's 5 options, and you need to pick the best one from each. And that's actually really fascinating kind of analog or comparison to even how humans who are non-deterministic are evaluated. You could pick or use any kind of tool, but you want to know who's the best at it. You sit them all down in an exam and you give them the same exact questions and you see who picks them all correctly. So that's actually a really interesting way of kind of hijacking the same system that works for us as non-deterministic things.
Yeah. I mean, and it's how all of us do math. Right. If I asked you to multiply 2 like 5-digit numbers together, like you probably get it wrong. If without a calculator or without a lot of time with pencil and paper. Right. But if you're me. Yeah. But even pencil and paper are tools. So if I just literally had you like do it in your head, you would probably get it wrong. So will a large language model. But if I give you a calculator, you're going to ace the exam. So will a large language model. And the impact's pretty dramatic. Like, if you give GPT 3.5 Turbo, the oldest, worst tool calling model out there, and you hand it like math tools, it will outperform a thinking model, like a brand new state of the art thinking model, and it'll do it much faster and much cheaper. Yeah. And so the impacts are huge. And those are really simple operations. Now you think of something complicated where authentication and authorization is involved, like, hey, go read my email. Go email Bob, letting him know I'm 5 minutes late. Well, now what the large language model have to figure out is actually almost impossible. Take hallucination rates out of complex workflows out of it. How's it going to handle an authorization flow, like an OAuth 2 flow, if you can't trust a model to hold keys,
Mm.
right? How you going to any security flow without you holding a secret is really difficult. We didn't know how to do it. And so how do you allow a large language model, an agent, wrapping a large language model to go execute secure operations like reading your email? I mean, most things that matter require some degree of security. How are you going to do that? And the answer ended up being, you're going to do it inside the tool call, inside the button.
Okay. So like, what does that mean for folks that are building now? Do they need to look at how they're building things differently? Like, I guess what's the connect in there?
Yeah. So when let's pretend we're building a personal assistant agent, and you say, hey, go check my email. Well, asking the agent to go figure out OAuth, asking the agent to go infer like all the things that would need to go into that doesn't make any sense. Don't do that. That should be encapsulated in a tool. Whether it's MCP or RKE or the protocols don't matter as much. It should be encapsulated in a tool, and that tool can be as deterministic as you want it to be. In many cases, they're completely deterministic.
Yeah.
And so checking your email doesn't need a model to do anything. Like there are Google APIs and there's all kinds of stuff. And so when the model says, oh, I want to check email, button, after that, your function definition in your deterministic code is going to go through a standard OAuth flow. It's going to do all this different stuff. And it's going to go hit the right endpoints. It might be one endpoint, it might be multiple endpoints to go do the thing that you asked it to do. And now here's the rub. This is where a lot of developers are getting stuck right now. They think, oh, well, Alex, what you're describing is just APIs. I'm just going to take the APIs that exist and maybe put some natural language around them and I'm done, right?
Right.
Unfortunately, that's not the way it works. So I'll give you a really good example. Let's say you want to reply to an email. Well, you're going to give the agent a reply to email button. So it's going to reply to email, right? Well, like there is no reply to email button. There is no reply to email endpoint in Gmail. Like there's actually a series of operations you have to go do. A lot of it is in your own code.
So it all has to still exist as a set block of API calls, and you still need that like orchestration,
Yeah, and they don't and are completely orthogonal to RESTful APIs. MCP and tools are ultimately APIs too. They're just different user, right? Like all the APIs that we know and love from the last 25 years, the user is really the developer who is wiring them into the code. And they know exactly where they're going to use them, they know exactly how they're going to use them. And it works every single time the same way. But that's not how agents work. And so REST APIs typically are resource-based CRUD operations, create, read, update, delete. So almost every API you can think of is typically defined as a resource, and then most of the operations are create, read, update, and delete. An agent is different. They think in intention-based workflows. I'm going to reply to an email. I'm going to send an email. I'm going to go check to see if so-and-so replied. And those are orthogonal. And they might include 0 API calls. They might include 100 API calls. They're just workflows versus resource-based CRUD operations. And worse, RESTful APIs as we typically know them today, they're really what I refer to as inside out. Like a Google Drive API is going to describe Google Drive. It's going to explain Google Drive in a lot of detail. It has APIs to manipulate everything in Google Drive. Your agent, let's say we're having a sales agent, and it has an operation to brief you before a sales call. It's going to go check the CRM for communication. It's going to check Drive for brochures. It's going to go check your email for something else. It doesn't give a shit about Drive. What it cares about is getting the brochures.
Right.
And so if the button is get brochures,
that's all it cares about.
All it cares about. But if the button instead is 37 different Google Drive operations, you're asking it to hallucinate, because now you're asking it to not only hit the right button, but to hit the right sequence of buttons and figure out at inference in real time, like what the right sequence of buttons is to get to the right brochure. It can do it, but it's going to be slower, it's going to be slower, it's going to be more expensive, and you increase the odds that it's going to get it wrong when you don't need to. And so part of the problem, part of the paradigm shift for a lot of developers is it doesn't matter who gives me an MCP server. Like Google might tomorrow have the most beautiful feature that ever existed for Google Drive. You're still not the customer build your own because you have to ground it in the domain and the use case of your agent, because your agent's intention-based workflows.
You're still going to need something between you and that, or you're going to have to modify that to fit what you're looking for.
Yeah. And I think right now, that's something that people are only now starting to realize as they're starting to build tools. Because it's super early. I mean, MCP's only been out for 3 months, but outside of very general purpose agents, which is the minority of the population of agents, you have to custom build your own intention-based workflows.
Yeah. And I want to, in some of the time that we have left, I want to shift the conversation a bit to learning a bit more about how your team is kind of like orienting itself around these problems and tackling these problems, because like you've described in our conversation, it's very much a mindset shift in how you approach the problem, how you solve the problem with the constraints that are around you, but then also then how you test it. And ultimately you build things by taking parts of other things and combining them in a secure way that ultimately like specializes in on that intent, right? You talked about like LLMs, they operate in intent versus APIs, they operate in like actions or endpoints, right? So when you are forming a team and you've brought together people together to build Arcade, what does it look like on the inside of an AI native company? And what are some things that you do there that you think that you do differently from maybe like more other companies?
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, it's a great question. So the first thing is who you hire. It all starts with hiring and team makeup. Now, because our product is ultimately like a service bus.
Yeah.
We're executing
it's
tools.
The get brochures button is on the platform.
Right? So we're like a service bus, but a major feature in that service bus is that we're going to handle authentication and authorization on behalf of the agent. We call this auth. It's probably their biggest feature. So because we do that for our company in particular, it's critical that we have the intersection of three really important skill sets. For us, you have to be agent native, and that's really hard to find. There aren't a lot of people that know how to build agents, let alone they don't work at OpenAI and Anthropic. And so my co-founder, Sam, is one of those. Sam has implemented more than 100 agents at like large enterprise. And so super lucky that we started this company together. So somebody needs to be agent native and really understand how these things are built and go to prod. Have to really, and this is the hard part, not demo native, but prod native, which is a different.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the big takeaways I think from this is moving the conversation from hype and from demo into prod.
Yeah. But then once you get past agent nativeness, then it's really about what is it you're actually doing? And you got to be expert at that too. And so for us, as an example, we have to be expert at distributed systems because we're running all of these services, all these tools, and we have to be expert at auth. And so, half the team is out of Okta. We had to invent new ways of doing auth to make all this stuff work.
Right.
I think that's an important piece because you can't just pattern match. You can't just say, oh, well, it worked like this last time. We're gonna do the same over. Like it will rhyme, but it won't be the same. And so that intersection of expertise is what leads you to the right innovative solutions versus the old players just adding the word agents to something and then saying, well, now it's agent native.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of teams and folks are seeing that as well. But I want to double click on that first one you said about, or one of those ones that you said in that list about being AI native or being like an agent native kind of worker. I think that's really interesting. So what do you think about that? What does that mean to you?
I mean, that means you've put agents in production before.
Okay, so I mean, like you've just made agents, you've taken the production, not necessarily that you are operating in an agentic way, in the way that you have your own workflows.
Yeah, if we're talking about an engineering team.
Yeah, like the right kind of like the mindsets or the skill shifts that you're seeing in your own team of like, oh wow, like they stand out, they're a high performer, and they're a high performer because of this. And a lot of times when I have these conversations with leaders like yourself, when we kind of peel that away a bit, it's because like, oh, they built this AI agent that does this thing for them, or oh, they captured their workflow in this way, which is one of those victories. So do you have like stories like that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like, I think right now everybody can. I was going to sound like a hot take, but people can fool themselves into thinking that they are like, at least in an engineering capacity, that they're agent native because, they use Cursor or, they use Windsurf or
Yeah,
something. Or
that's what people say. Yeah.
And that's important. Like, don't get me wrong, that's an important skill set. Like, any engineer who's not deep in that stuff is like going to be out of a job and relatively soon. But because it's such an enormous like lift. But that's not the same thing as having built an agent that went to production.
Prod, not demo. Prod, not demo.
Right? Like, taking an agent to prod is a very different experience than having a conversation with Cloud Code. And that is what sets people apart right now in the engineering teams that are trying to build agents.
Okay, that makes sense. So I'd be interested in knowing how that engineering group grows over time. The amount of people who have built agents and taken them to prod right now, that's a small pool of people.
It is a small pool of people, but you don't need a huge group.
No.
Because you still need everything else, right? And so, but what's great, if you have a really good engineering culture and everybody's in the same office, like us, and I don't know how you do this in distributed teams, so I'll pass that to somebody else. But in a local team, the cross-pollination happens really fast.
Yeah, it does.
The person who's the agent expert is sitting next to the person who's the auth expert, sitting next to the person who's distributed systems expert, and they all start cross-pollinating, and all of a sudden the distributed systems person is now starting to become a little bit more agent native every single day, and then all of a sudden they have an epiphany one day that even the agent builder didn't have, and vice versa. Like, the auth person is cross-pollinating with the agent builder, and the auth person is like, oh, well, maybe we did this way or that way. And so that's where the magic happens.
Yeah, no, for sure. We've talked about this with some guests before too. We had JJ Tang, CEO of Rootly, and we talked quite a bit about their knowledge sharing, like working in the open, sharing team practices. This cross-pollinating effect that you're talking about is really critical for being like a customer-oriented engineer, because all of them have different aspects of what the customer is looking for or what like the product needs to be. So the more you put them together, the better. I will say, in a distributed team myself, I will speak in the defense of the distributed teams that we're also quite good at the cross-pollination. It's just it happens a little differently. But I totally agree with you in terms of that being really important. And I know we're kind of starting to wrap up our conversation and come near the end of some of the stuff we've talked about. But you've captured a lot of really interesting thoughts about how teams are building tools, but also how they're orienting themselves around solving those problems. Is there any kind of lasting advice or that you'd like to give for if they're more that traditional engineering team who doesn't have that agent native engineer somewhere within them? You can't cross-pollinate from nothing. So how do you really start that culture? And what opportunities do you see for that kind of team?
Yeah. I think the answer is both easy and extremely difficult. The answer is you have to start building. You have to start building with agents. And maybe the team's not ready to start building production grade agents. Maybe it starts with hackathons. Maybe it starts with, the leadership of the organization carving off time to letting the team play and learn. This stuff is really difficult. This stuff is, you're not going to pick it up in a day. It's going to take you months of tinkering and playing and building to run up against enough of the walls and learn. Because it's ultimately a new paradigm. I probably most listeners here, don't remember the internet days, but a web developer was a alien creature to the traditional client server developer.
Yeah.
Right. Which was an alien creature to like, the mainframe developers. Right.
Right.
And so, we take for granted how native most of us were to web, but it was a huge paradigm shift. And similarly, right now, it's a huge paradigm shift. It's a whole new set of technologies, a whole new set of vendors, a whole new ecosystem, a whole new patterns. Testing's different, workflows are different. So the only way to learn it is to start doing it. And the books, there might be books out there that are great, but nothing is a replacement for hands-on experience.
Yeah, you got to get out there. If you haven't built the demo, you got to build the demo. If you built the demo, maybe it's time to challenge yourself and think about how would that demo go to prod. I think that's a really powerful takeaway from this conversation.
And when you build that demo, you should start by using Arcade to make it connect, so that when it goes to prod, it's easy.
Yes. So Alex, where can folks go to learn a little more about Arcade and how you're solving this problem that we've talked about?
Yeah, thank you. So yes, our website is arcade.dev.
Cool.
And so they should go there. We also have a YouTube channel where we have a ton of examples and walkthroughs on how to build pretty breakthrough agents that can go interact with the outside world, things like Google and databases and your own APIs. We show you how to custom build your own, your own tools, in addition to using our out of the box tools. And we've done everything we can to make it as like user friendly for traditional developers as we possibly can. And I think we've done that. So I hope it comes to our keto tips.
Yeah, definitely. We'll put the links in the show notes so our listeners can go check it out, learn a little bit more about the problem space that you're working in. I think it's cool that y'all also have examples up on YouTube. I'm definitely going to go check out the tool. Maybe there's a chance for us to collaborate on some of that stuff in the future, because I'm building with this stuff every day too, like a lot of our listeners, just trying to understand where it's all going. So I really appreciate you sitting down with us and walking us through some of the things that you've been building that's been top of mind. It's been really interesting for us, and for those that have been listening, if you've been listening to the conversation and you are one of those engineers who happens to have taken an AI agent to prod, we would love to hear about it, what you thought about today's conversation with Alex, but also just about your own experiences in doing that. So please drop a comment somewhere, anywhere that you're listening to this, or find us on LinkedIn. We'd love to continue that conversation. And if you're still experimenting, well, we want to hear from you too, because we're all on the journey together. And the only way that we're going to get there safely and securely is by building it together. So thanks for joining us on Dev Interrupted, and we'll see you next time.